Welcome to Board Game Binge, the place where we bring you bite-sized, bingeable board game content from across the industry. I'm your host, James Staley, and in this episode, we're chatting with Noah Kinsey, the Customer Outreach Manager for Jellop, Kickstarter's official digital advertising partner. Noah, welcome to the binge. How you doing, my friend?
Good. How are you doing, good sir?
I'm doing great. Oh man, Noah, this is long overdue. I've been wanting to have Jellop on this podcast now for a couple years. I just haven't ever been able to get it all kind of connected. And you and I have just started talking recently as well. So, we were talking this past week. I'm like, I got to get you on the podcast. Like, this is now the time is ripe. And certainly with the situation between Kickstarter and Jellop, which we'll get into in a little bit, I think this is the time where anybody that's looking at getting into this industry in terms of publishing their own games or being part of a game that goes on Kickstarter, and they're looking for advertising partners and things like that, this would probably be a good episode for them to kind of listen in on and kind of hear kind of behind the scenes how this stuff kind of works. So first and foremost, what's your background, Noah? Like, how long have you been with Jellop?
I've been with Jellop for 3 years now, coming next month, actually. So, with my background, I spent most of my career in business development. Whether it's working with corporate initially, but then wanted to step away from that and worked way more with startups who are going to the next phase of their business.
Mm.
So, really help them level up, as well as working in the entertainment industry, as a producer, doing both creative development, but also on the business side. I was able to use my business background to work in that field. And because a lot of creative people in the entertainment industry don't exactly have business sense because they're more creative than anything. So I'm able to come in and help them build a foundation where it can become a business. And my last production company job, I was a production manager, which
Mm.
basically we're a VFX company that, well, VFX, but also practical effects. So I don't know if a lot of people know this, but movies, they outsource so much of the work within a movie. And
Yeah.
so the company I work for did a lot of the props, visual effects, special effects, not CGI, but like the real
Mm.
stuff. And my job as production manager was basically working with all the different clients for bids, all the non sexy stuff about production, but basically sales, very similar to, what I've been doing my whole other part of my career. So that's what I did. And then again, joined Jellop about 3 years ago because what I like about it, what really excited me about it is I'm helping both sides of
Mm.
smaller businesses. Jellop, as big as we are, we're we're like the number one marketing company on Kickstarter. We've helped over 4,000 campaigns raise 1.1 billion on Kickstarter. So as big as we are, it's still a small sized company
Yeah.
looking to grow themselves. And I'm working literally every single one of my clients is basically their own startup business where they have an idea and they want to bring it to market. So it's been very, very fun and challenging and fulfilling, quite honestly. Get to meet people like yourself and people who listen to your show.
It's got to be, I guess, valuable to have kind of that business experience coming into this as well, right? So you're not just like, a digital marketer that's kind of helping with client interface, but you're literally coming in with, entrepreneurial and business experience right into this role and being able to kind of apply that and not just apply, but be able to relate with people. And, I have a consultancy business. I kind of have outside of board games. And what I find is having been kind of on working for a manufacturer for a good chunk of my career before switching over to kind of the agency side, it brings just so much more insight when you're talking to clients and trying to help them understand, because you can put yourself in their shoes. You've been in their shoes, quite frankly, right? And you can say, look, this is kind of what we're saying on this one, and this is kind of what it means to you and how it could potentially be impacted on your side. And I find usually there's a deep appreciation of that because it creates kind of a shorthand, so to speak, between you and that client interface to where you can now start talking kind of on the same level. So that I think that's kind of cool, right? That you've been able to bring this in to this industry. Has there been any like? So do you still do like any of the VFX side or any of the practical? Is that life now behind you, or like do you still have any kind of like touching in that industry at all, like from a hobby side or anything at all, or?
I multitask. So I'm still in the entertainment industry world,
Oh, cool.
both in creative development, working with IP, as well as helping on the business side, being able to speak to investors, being able to speak to production companies and other producers. Because again, there's a lot more of the business aspect or business world within the entertainment industry than a lot of people think. I mean, it is show business. So
Yeah,
there's a lot of that that still bleeds in and still working a lot in that world. But you're exactly right when it comes to how it helps with Jellop because I can speak to the bigger picture
yeah,
and I can talk to someone. They're most Kickstarter creators, their goal isn't to have a successful Kickstarter campaign in the end. There's stuff they use Kickstarter to springboard into the real world, as I call everything outside of Kickstarter, because
yeah,
Kickstarter, that ecosystem's different than everything else. So being able to talk about, I understand your end goal is either speaking with investors and having a success story or speaking to retailers because the success you have on Kickstarter shows that there's a market for it. And big retailers, especially, understand their store is just real estate. They need to make sure each square footage has turnaround time for sales.
yeah.
So there's a bigger picture I can speak to help let them know, if nothing else, that I understand their long-term goals instead of just, well, what are we going to do for you now in the Kickstarter ecosystem? And then the end. So it definitely helps having that business world experience. So you're exactly right.
And what chunk of the business would you say is it the board? Because obviously this podcast is focused on board
Mhm.
games, and I know Jellop covers more than just board games. But what would you say is kind of a percentage of your business you work on that is focused on board games?
Well, product design and tabletop games are the top two categories on Kickstarter.
Yeah,
Product design's much bigger, but I would argue that tabletop games are actually, I don't want to say by genre, but by segment, much bigger because product design, that's a huge umbrella
yeah,
that so many things fit under, whereas tabletop games is tabletop games. You know, there might be like playing card games, like a few other smaller segments, but as a whole, tabletop game, I think, is just that much bigger. And when we started, since we're performance based, where we only take a small percentage of the pledges we bring to you, not overall.
hmm,
Because of that, when Jellop started, we had to start with the bigger categories,
yeah.
the ones where we can just really make a dent and be where the people are. So tabletop games is one of our absolute biggest categories that we work with.
Yeah. So for those who don't know what Jellop is, right? So I want to kind of take a
Mhm.
step back and kind of because there might be somebody listening saying, "What the heck is Jellop?" Right? So explain kind of in the simplest terms you possibly can what is Jellop and what you guys do, and then we'll dive deeper from there if that's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So in a somewhat large nutshell, we are like you said, Kickstarter's official digital ad partner. We run ads on Facebook, Instagram, Google, and YouTube ads. We also have an email newsletter that goes out to a massive amount of backers, but as you potentially talked about in other podcasts, it's still an email newsletter, so you have to catch people on the right day for that, but it's a
Yeah,
pretty significant audience for that as well. But we really go out there and go after both the audiences and the demographics, meaning the types of people who have statistically purchased more games. And depending on is it a skirmish game, you know, RPG, like different ones, like going after those specific demographics is what we do. And then we direct them to our client's Kickstarter page where they pledge. Again, we're completely performance based. We don't take any money up front.
yeah,
We only ask for that small percentage of the ones we can tangibly prove came from us. And even then, we're not expecting payment until after you get paid from Kickstarter. So, really, when it comes to what we do, we need you to be successful for us to be successful.
yeah. I'm going to dumb this down even more if I can
Sure.
for some of our audience. So, and the analogy I give is I was recently talking to a new designer offline, not on the podcast, but often I'll provide advice to people. They'll reach out to me and say, hey, I'm trying to figure out X, Y, Z. Can you point me in the right direction? And the answer is always yes. I want to pay it forward. And I was talking to the designer and, I was saying like, who's doing your ads, right? Because you're obviously doing some pre-marketing and so forth, and you're going into your campaign. And they were small, right? They were just starting out. And they said, well, they were because, they had, read a bunch of articles on how to do meta ads and realized, good for them. They realized that meta was one of the areas they needed to focus on, which is very important because that's still the bulk of where pledges come from on Kickstarter in terms of advertising mediums. But they hadn't had a lot of experience, right? So they're going to go through and try to use the classic, meta training tools and so forth on how to optimize their ads. And what I explained to them is I said, there's several companies out there, agencies, and I mean, I can rhyme off several of them right now, right? But I mean, they will help you do those for you, right? Where for you to do it, yes, you're going to get some impact from ads. Ads are going to give you impact versus not doing ads. So you have to do ads. But the question becomes, do you want your cost per lead, for example, to be $5-6, or you want it to be $2-3 a lead, right? Because that's the difference we're talking about between you doing it and maybe hiring a third party that does this for a living. Because companies like Jellop and others have a very deep history that they can draw from in terms of the algorithms being trained for certain categories, certain demographics, and so forth. And they can take who you're targeting with the type of thing you're targeting, like the type of product you're bringing to the market, and slice and dice through that history to figure out, okay, where are these people located? And it is way more efficient for them to get to those people than it will be for you to get to those people. And for me, I always use third party, although I do marketing on the side, right? I have a boutique marketing agency outside the board game industry. I still recognize that there are people out there that can do it way more efficiently than I can. So A, it's going to cost me less per acquisition, because it all comes down to your cost per acquisition, how much you're spending. By the time it works through to a pledge, how much advertising dollars did you have to spend by the time that person finally pledged? Right now it's about $17 US, and that number can vary between say 15 and 20, but it's expensive, right? And if you can get companies and can get that number down, that means you're reaching that much more people, you're getting that many more pledges for the same budget. It also, time, there's value to time, right? I'm a company of one. I'm doing customer service on my prior campaign. I'm tracking down, fulfillment for games that are fulfilling right now and trying to find, where's this person is going to Australia? How come their game hasn't arrived yet? So I'm spending so much time doing other things, multitasking, being able to take a chunk, which is so vitally important to my campaign, carve it off and hand it to someone else to manage for me, like set up the guidelines and goalposts up front. That frees up that time that I can put into other things that's actually going to drive true backer engagement, which is that one-on-one with the backers, right? They want to have their constant communication, and I want to communicate with them, but you only have so much time in a day. So that's kind of my dumbed down version of why you need a company like a Jellop. And again, people do your research. There's lots of companies out there. We're talking to Jellop today, and I happen to think they're great, but do your research. There's tons of them out there, and we've talked about a ton of them on our podcast. But pick one. Like it is crucial that you hire an agency to do it, and then the other part that's going to come into it that we're going to get into now is, okay, well then how does that financial thing work? So let's talk about it for Jellop. So I'll kind of kick it off. Maybe you kind of take the ball from there. But for the Jellop model, when you say that it's a pay for performance and is kind of paying in the back end, my understanding of that is. You guys are going to manage the ads. The client's credit card is attached to the Meta account, right? So they're still paying for the ads, but you guys are managing them in a way more efficient way than they would, right? So same budget, but experts doing it versus someone trying to stumble their way through, right? On the back end, through tags and tracking and things you can do in Kickstarter, because Kickstarter allows you to actually tag. They'll give you specific strings of code you can attach literally to anything you do. And if someone clicks on that, then it tracks that person through the system. We can see, did that ad directly impact a purchase, right? Or a pledge. And it's attached to that string of code that's attached to the ad that, say, Jellop in this case is managing. And that's how Jellop is able to track on the back end which ads were we responsible for bringing to the table versus stuff that just organically came in through your own email list or maybe through people finding it through Kickstarter's platform, etc. And then that's what your commission is based on, the things you actually bring in. So that's what we mean by pay for performance. Is that a fair kind of way of kind of framing it?
Yeah, I would say for the most part. We do attach our pixel to the
Yeah.
campaign so we can track literally which pledge came from which ad. And to your point about someone working with a marketing company, it is very beneficial to work with an efficient marketing company because when people are running their own ads, they tend to maybe only run a couple ads. They're going off of what they assume might do well. On kind of a smaller scale, we create 15 to 20 different ads from the client's assets and A/B test them from the beginning to see, to your point, which one leads to higher
Yeah.
conversions. Because we want to allocate more of the marketing spend behind the ads that lead to a higher percentage of sales and decrease or eliminate the ad spend behind ones that just aren't doing well. So using that tracking tool, not only can we see which pledge came from which ad, but we can also see which of the ads led to higher sales, which demos responded more. We even start with typically a lookalike campaign. If there's a game that's similar, I already said skirmish. If there's another skirmish game similar that did really well, we'll say, okay, what demos did we go after for that one? Let's see, like, of those demos, which ones really respond to this skirmish. So there's a lot of learning that we've had that creators just haven't. And there's more of a science to it. But yeah, so we'll front the Google and YouTube ad spend side. That's about 20% of the daily ad spend. It's such a small amount. Like we're
Yeah.
not gonna nickel and dime the creator for such a tiny amount. Facebook, again, like you said, is still the best place because Facebook is the place where people go to find an excuse to leave Facebook. So ads and articles have always, I mean, let's be honest, like people go on Facebook because they
Yeah.
want to be on the internet, but they don't know where to go. So they go to Facebook for ideas of where else to go.
Yeah.
So ads and articles, the engagements has always been really great on Facebook. So for that, we do use the creator's credit card and we'll run the ads from our account and Facebook will bill them directly. But when you onboard with us, when you sign up, you tell us the parameter of your spend. So we work with budgets of all size. We also, have an ongoing conversation throughout the campaign to make sure we're running it in a way that the creator's comfortable with. So when you see success stories of those and that have raised 1 million or raised 100,000 and you hear how much they spent, it, you for one, no one should feel pressured to go be well beyond their means
Yeah.
because as you've probably talked about, success is very relative on Kickstarter.
Yeah.
It really depends on like what you need in order to bring this to life and have the future conversations you need to. So we work with budgets big and small. But yeah, so you pretty much nailed it. Just I want to
Yeah, no, that's
fine-tune a
good. No, I
few of those
appreciate it. A
comments.
couple other things I want to throw in there so that people are clear. And this goes for every marketing company I've come across that does ads. So, I mean, Jellop does this, but everyone does this, which is I want to highlight the fact that you establish the budget. You, the publisher, you, the game creator, you are setting the budget. So there's never a concern of, okay, are these guys going to go beyond what I can afford? Because you set those guardrails. In addition to that, they all have the emergency stop button, so to speak, right? So they all have, Jellop included, at any point you can send a note saying, stop the ads, and they will immediately stop. Immediately, right? Like, so it's not
Maybe
like
end of day.
end of
Yeah,
day.
they
But
stop
I mean,
up that day.
where I'm going with this is you don't have to worry about, okay, my card is, they're just going to keep hitting my card for the next week.
Right.
And I mean, you have control. So you're not bound, even if you set that budget, if things are not working, you have the ability to pause things, right, and kind of and reassess. So what I think is kind of interesting about Jellop specifically is this idea of you guys being like a partner of Kickstarter, which was announced, I believe it was last year. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what does that mean that like Jellop is like a partner of Kickstarter?
Yeah, I think we're nearing 2 years of that, which is exciting. But it means a couple different things. For one, we they refer people to us often, where someone's looking for advertising and they'll send them our way because we've helped raise 1.1 billion on
Yeah,
Kickstarter, and Kickstarter itself's I believe still 8.5 billion. I don't think they're at 8.6. So we've helped campaigns be
more than
responsible
10%. Yeah.
for a significant amount of what Kickstarter's raised. So they like us there, but also we do, have a really good reputation of doing right by our clients. So that was something Kickstarter was very comfortable, co-signing on, vouching for us. We also have access to some of their audiences, so we can look at historical information, and really be able to target even more specifically. So that's pretty significant for us to be able to use some of the learning from Kickstarter directly
Yeah.
of all campaigns in order to help better serve our clients.
Can you slice and dice that as well? Like, do you have the ability to say, okay, let's look at like a space game that's recently been very successful on Kickstarter, and how is that audience broken down, and so forth? Like, do you have that kind of depth of insight,
Yeah,
or?
we'd be able to when it comes to categories or types of games. My team is way better at dissecting all that information than
Yeah.
I am, but kind of overall, we are able to say, okay, this one is this type of game. Like, let's use Kickstarter audiences for this one because we think that that's had a lot of success on Kickstarter.
Mm.
So let's use historical learning from that in order to benefit this client and see what of those groups appeal to this. Now, I do not to pat Jellop's back too hard on all of this, but when it comes to Kickstarter's audience or even our newsletter, that's the low-hanging fruit. Our power really comes from the learning of our own analytics.
Sure.
That's where even when I tell people with the newsletter, it ends up as big as that list is that it goes out to, it still only accounts for about 10 to 20% of the overall pledges we bring to a campaign,
Yeah.
which isn't a massive game changer, but it's a really nice added value. And when it comes to the Kickstarter world, what we've learned from our learning is our own Jellop learning versus Kickstarter is really comprehensive as well. So it's a nice feather in our cap, but it's just one of the many things that have helped us be as successful as we are.
I'm continuously surprised, or not surprised, but pleased to see this data point in the back end Kickstarter dashboards, right? So now I'm on my eighth campaign now, and I can see, because they'll report, Kickstarter in the back end dashboard will actually report, here's what percentage of your backers are returning backers from prior campaigns. And people may assume that it's going to be more than half of your backers are going to be people that have backed prior campaign, but it's not. Like, it might be 10, 15%, 20 maybe, right? But it still is, the majority of your pledges are new people coming in. But then these are new people that then 10%, 10 to 20% of them on your next campaign potentially going to carry over as well. So it's kind of cool to see that influx of a new audience constantly coming in as you're building each of these campaigns.
Yeah, it's important.
Yeah.
Typically, or I should say on average, a tabletop game, about 10, for a successful one, uh, about 10% of backers are new backers, meaning they've never pledged on Kickstarter
Kickstarter
before.
at all, you're saying?
Correct. That's
Yeah.
what, when it
Wow.
says new backers, that's what that means. Someone who
Mm.
had to create an account. I mean, maybe they have before, but they created a new account for this one, so
Yeah.
they wouldn't necessarily know that it was returning if that's the
Mm.
case. But for most other categories, it's about 25%. But for tabletop games, it's around 10.
Yeah.
Um, the plus side to the tabletop game community is it's not shrinking. It's as strong as it's ever been. The challenge for tabletop creators, though, is there's just more campaigns for tabletop than ever before.
Yeah.
So that pie gets split up with more people,
Yeah.
where it's really important to get out there and find new people, find new audiences, and appeal to different people, just because you don't I mean, everyone's going to second guess themselves because they put a lot of pressure on themselves, but you don't want to make less on the next campaign than you did the previous one and think, oh no, am I losing my touch? When the fact of the matter is, maybe you just didn't get out to the right people,
Yeah.
the additional people.
And the market keeps shifting. And with
Hmm.
tabletop, like your audience. So, for instance, the campaign we had before this one was called Garden Geckos, right? So it's an abstract tile placing, hex tile placing game. I'd say family weight. And we brought in X number of backers for that, and now we're working on a campaign called Cities of Venus Survivors, which has already surpassed what we did on Garden Geckos. And someone could say, well, Garden Geckos was half of what we did on the first version of Cities of Venus, which was the campaign before that. And it's not that Garden Geckos was a failure. Actually, we are very happy with the success of that campaign. It's a different audience,
Yeah,
right? And the people that come in on, say, miniature-based games versus space-based games versus Euros versus abstract, you got different audiences you're playing with, and those different audiences have different sizes too, right? So, yeah, don't be discouraged, I guess, is the headline news if you ebb and flow in terms
not
of
at
your
all.
campaign, success from
Yeah.
campaign to campaign. I want to touch on really quickly, though, a term that we haven't talked about on this episode yet, which is return on ad spend. So that kind of minimum ROS that you're often talking about when you talk with marketing companies. Can you explain what that is to the audience, kind of in the simplest terms possible, so they can understand it and start prepping themselves as they're starting to work through their budgets, perhaps on their upcoming campaigns?
Yeah, I can only speak to my marketing company
Yeah.
when it comes to this because we have a calculator
Hmm.
that we send out to creators to figure out what the minimum return on ad spend is. But basically, that is, like in layman's terms, the break-even point
Yeah.
for like the ad spend that we do on where like your profit breaking point is. You're basically saying like if you have a 2.5x return on ad spend, what that would mean is you're telling us for every $1 of ad spend, I need to make $2.50 in pledges just to break even.
Yeah.
Because our intention is to bring as many pledges as humanly possible to your campaign without you operating at a loss, meaning without you
Yeah.
losing money. So we want to make sure we're staying at or above that minimum. Now, again, when it comes to Jellop, there's like a little built-in cushion there. Because so like we like to know your true return on ad spend because we know we haven't talked about this yet, but you've probably talked about it on other podcasts,
Yeah.
but the ranking on Kickstarter is like SEO. So the higher you're ranked, the more visibility you get, the more organic traffic you get. So our intention, besides just bringing your dollars to you, is helping you rank as high as possible on Kickstarter so you get more visibility, more organic traffic, and more organic pledges. But our reporting that we do only shows what we can tangibly prove came from you or came from us, excuse me.
Yeah.
So, like, we don't include the organic pledges you get because you're higher ranked because we're not going to guesstimate how many pledges you wouldn't have gotten without us.
Yeah.
So, there's still that built in cushion, but basically, and sometimes people say, well, what kind of return on ad spend can I expect? And it really depends on the day. It depends on your goals. Our goal isn't to get you the highest return on ad spend, meaning if your minimum is 2.5 and we hit 5, we're not like, all right, nobody move. We're going to stay right where we are
Yeah.
because this is amazing. We're going to start to spend more because we're leaving money on the table.
Yeah.
And the real world is where you want to worry about like overall ROI or profits or like making your millions, selling a
Yeah.
million games, whatever. But Kickstarter the point is to make as much money as possible in order to prove that there is a demand in the marketplace, that consumers
Hmm.
perceive value. A lot of times for tabletop game to pay for manufacturing, all without losing money. But that the bulk is to tell a success story moving forward.
Yeah, I think there's two really good points I just want to re-highlight there. One is that ranking is very important, and the second piece of that is the organic coming from that. Because often I'll talk to someone that is doing ads, and they'll say, "Oh my gosh, say my return ad spend was 2.5 was a minimum that they could do," and then they're feeling that okay, that's their break even, and they're going to if they drop below that, they're losing money. But the reality is like for every 6 backers you bring to the table, Kickstarter is bringing 4 organically to the table, right? So even if it dips slightly below that 2.5, you're still making money overall, right? Because you're still driving the engine, and that's not even including the efficiencies you get on the production side if you start getting up to higher backer counts where your cost per unit is significantly lower, right? So I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's important for people to kind of work into that equation, which isn't even in your math, quite frankly. But, I have my math I do on the side as well, or then I do include that to say, okay, well, what's my true one, knowing that there's some organic growth in there that they're not accounting for. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where is Jellop kind of going from here, though? Like, so now, obviously you guys are being highlighted, I'd say, by Kickstarter, because you're the official partner, right? And that was announced officially. I thought it was last year, but 2 years ago even, which, again, kudos for you guys. That's amazing. But that's got to put you in a position, I would think, to say, okay, how can we innovate, or how can we kind of up our game from here? And are you allowed to talk about kind of the vision of the company, of where you guys see yourselves going from this point forward?
Well, we have a few things already in place that we've started to do.
Okay, yeah.
So I can kind of talk about that more.
Yeah.
We've started to do some pre-campaign, similar to how we choose our clients for live marketing. We want to at least make sure our work is going to be an asset to that creator, before always taking someone on. So we want to know what their goals are. Typically, we're going to say yes to tabletop because, again, that's been our bread and butter since we started about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But with pre-campaign, it's usually about a week, maybe 7 to 10 days before the campaign. It's more of like a final blitz to getting leads in order to have an even stronger start.
Yeah.
I'm also pretty particular when I talk with creators on whether or not I recommend that for them, but that's something that we've started to do. We also, Kickstarter is now allowing late pledges for campaigns. I think they saw maybe some ways of making money that have been taken away from them. So they've started to allow late pledges into the mix. So we're able to now help our creators even on that side. Once they've moved into that stage, we can still help market to just bring. Before, we were just 30 days, the 30-day campaign.
Yeah. Then you're out.
That's it. That's all we're doing. But now we're starting to help a little bit before and also afterwards. We do right now, it's only product design, but I think once we get to a point where it's bigger, we'll be able to expand it probably next to tabletop game. But we have our own e-commerce platform now for after campaigns where they can continue to sell. It's called the Jellop Collection. Again, right now it's just product design and we're being very specific, but we really want to fine tune that before we offer it farther out. So then that way we're being a true asset to creators. We don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. So we like to make our offers when we're at a point where we know we can really be an asset.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds awesome. Well, for those who do want to check out Jellop, I am going to put a link in the show notes. You can also go to Jellop, I believe, .com, right? So Jellop.
Yeah, or just email me. You can add my email, noah@jellop.com.
Sure.
Super simple.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll put that in the show notes if you're cool with that, if you don't mind being blitzed.
Absolutely. Yeah, that might be even better because they'll, instead of it going to my team and they're like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, sure.
I did not speak on a podcast. So instead, if they want to reach out to me, I'm happy to help however I can.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, I encourage people to check it out. Noah, I want to wish you and your team all the best in this coming year. I can't wait to see some of these new initiatives you guys are working on, and I'll be watching closely.
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
No worries, my friend. You take care. Cheers. This has been an episode of the Board Game Binge podcast, hosted by James Staley, produced by James Staley and Mike Bruner, with original music by Nick Smith. If you would like to watch these interviews live, simply subscribe to our YouTube channel, Board Game Binge, and you'll get access to live interviews, giveaways, and interesting board game content from across the industry. I can't wait for you to join us. See you next time.